Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. So here today we are going to be looking at the Phylum Sporozoa. Mainly we are going to look at the life cycle of the malaria disease. So what is the Phylum Sporozoa? So the Phylum Sporozoa is a part of what we call protists. So generally they are parasitic, non-motile, meaning to say they do not move on their own. They do not move on their own as they lack locomotive structures. So locomotive structures are those structures that help in movement. So locomotion has to do with movement. So locomotive structures are those structures that help in movement. The other characteristic of the Phylum Sporozoa is that they depend on host fluid to move. So they do not move on their own, but they depend on host fluids to be able to move. Then the other thing that we are going to have about the Phylum Sporozoa is that they cause malaria. Now, which is a bigger chunk of what we are learning today. So malaria is caused by the female Anopheles mosquito. So malaria is caused by female Anopheles mosquito. So the Sporozoa, known as it is caused by the Sporozoa known as Plasmodium. So this Plasmodium has got two hosts. It has got the female mosquito, and humans. So it is able to live in females and humans. In humans, they cause disease. So now let's look at what we are referring to as how does the Plasmodium cycle operate. So what have we talked about? So the other thing that we have said, they are non-motile. They cannot move. Have we talked about they produce spores? So they produce spores. So this diagram shall help us be able to explain everything. So pay attention to the terms that I'm going to be using. Some terms I'm going to be ignoring them, which are important for your exam. I'm just going to be using the terms that are important for your exam. So we have the first carrier, which is the mosquito. So the mosquito comes, the female Anopheles mosquito comes. When it comes, it bites you. When it bites you, it deposits its structures, which we are going to call the sporozoites. So when they are deposited, the sporozoites are deposited, they move to the liver like that. When they reach the liver, then they begin to be able to divide. So this period takes about 5 to 12 days. So in 5 to 12 days, they begin to grow, they begin to divide, and also replicate. So they begin to grow, divide, and replicate. So after replication has taken place, they now transform into, first they now transform into what we are going to call Merozoites. The Merozoites. So after that, after the growth, division, and replication, they now transform into what we are going to call Merozoites. So these merozoites, when they transform into merozoites, there is a general increase in the temperature, which harms the liver cells, which we are going to call the hepatocytes. So they damage the liver cells, which we are calling hepatocytes. So after that, they move to the red blood cells like that to attack the red blood cell. So they move to the bloodstream in order to attack the red blood cell. So, and when they are in the red blood cell, they divide asexually, producing thousands of merozoites. So this is what is happening. So when they are here now, they divide asexually, producing thousands of merozoites. So as a result, these merozoites causes the rupture of the red blood cell. It's more like the red blood cell bursts. So now other merozoites will be able to differentiate into what we are going to call gametocytes. So the gametocytes still remain in the red blood cell. So now what happens is that when the mosquito again feeds on the human who is infected, they will be able to more like ingest the red blood cell in their body. So now in their body, what happens is, so generally the gametocyte will turn into the male and the female gametes. So now when the mosquito ingests them, what happens is that we have the red blood cell. The red blood cell will be able to burst. It will be able to break. So as the red blood cell, you will find that the male and the female gametes, which when we have macro gametes, that is the female, the micro gamete, we have the male. Since the female, or how you can remember the male and the female gametes is, since the female is the one that causes disease, so macro means huge, so you can just remember it to be macro, gametes to be the female gamete, since it's the female that causes disease. So we have micro gametes like that. Then what happens is that the male and female, so these two, the male and the female gametes, will be able to fuse. So they will be able to fuse, and after they fuse, they are going to become what we are going to call the zygote, which makes sense. The fusion of the male and the female will produce the zygote. The zygote then further on differentiates or develops. So the zygote, let me rub some things. The zygote will now be able to develop. It will be able to develop into what we are going to call an oocyst. So an oocyst like that. Then what we are going to have is, you should know the days, after 8 to 12 days, the oocyst will be able to burst. So the oocyst will be able to burst, and as it bursts, as you can see here, it has broken down like that. It bursts or ruptures. Then what happens? So all of this process now is happening in the female mosquito inside. So it releases what we are going to call the sporozoites. Then the sporozoites will be able to go to the female mosquitoes' saliva. So they will be able to go to the female mosquitoes' saliva like that. So after the saliva, the cycle continues. So a quick recap: we have the sporozoites. The sporozoites are deposited into the bloodstream, which they go to the liver cells. Liver cells, they differentiate, they divide, they grow, and all those things. Then after growth, they develop into merozoites. Merozoites raise the temperature and cause damage to the liver cells, which are hepatocytes, which then moves to the red blood cells. So after that, the merozoites will be able to damage the red blood cells. First, they will be able to replicate, After replication, they will be able to burst the red blood cells and be released like that. Then other Merozoites, before destroying the red blood cells, will develop into what we are going to call the Gametocytes. Then the Gametocytes, which are the male and female gametes. So these will now be able to migrate. So when the second mosquito bites you, it will be able to ingest the blood that contains the gametocytes, which are the microgametes and the macrogametes. Macro is for females, micro is for males. So after the red blood cell that has been ingested by the mosquito, it will be able to split into these two. Then these two are able to now fuse. When they fuse, they are going to produce a zygote. From the zygote will be able to develop into an oocyst. So the oocyst now will be able to release what we are going to call sporozoites after a period of 8 to 12 days. So that is it for the Plasmodium cycle. And the sporozoites will just move to the saliva of the mosquito. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you would like, subscribe, and share for more. So this other diagram shows we have the sporozoites deposited into, it enters the liver cells, the hepatocytes to be specific. So when the sporozoites divide, grow, they become the Merozoites, which then are now released from the liver cells upon damaging some of the cells. Then they are going to go to the red blood cells. After the red blood cells, they begin to divide. As they divide, they become a cluster of cells like that. They divide into a lot, which causes it to burst. But some of the Merozoites will be able to become what we are going to call the Gametocytes. So these Gametocytes are now the ones that are absorbed, or rather that are ingested by the mosquito. Then in the mosquito, the life cycle goes as the male and the female gametes will fuse to form what we are going to call the zygote. From the zygote, we are going to form what we are going to call an oocyte. Then the oocyte, finally, it is going to burst and release what we are referring to as the sporozoites, which go to the salivary glands of the mosquito. Then it will be able to begin the process over again.